One of the wealthiest men in the world is being sued by his former mistress, who is roughly 40 years younger than he is. The former tech CEO in his 70s is being accused of being the mastermind of a stalking scheme to intimidate a 30-year-old using his power and influence, forcing her to take out a restraining order to protect her parents, even her dog. She also claims she's the victim of abuse. I'll tell you what the billionaire is saying as he swings back at the allegations and whether this is anything more than just a high-class, highly public breakup battle. We're on The Case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. This story involves one of the wealthiest men on the planet. It also involves his former mistress. Now, these two have been involved in business dealings, and there's a lot of legal issues that are playing out on that side of it. But now we are learning that she has accused him of abuse and of stalking her. The billionaire we're talking about is Eric Schmidt. He was the CEO of Google from 2001 to 2017. And during that time, the company went from a search engine powerhouse to one of the most powerful companies in the world. That period of time also made Eric Schmidt one of the wealthiest people alive. Specifically, right now, according to Bloomberg, he's the 44th wealthiest person on the planet. His net worth is around $45 billion with a B dollars. Now, Schmidt's professional life is one thing. His personal life, that is a whole nother story. He's been married to his wife, Wendy, since 1980. Here's a picture of the two of them that Eric recently posted on his Instagram. This is from May of this year. According to the Daily Mail and the New York Post, though, the Schmidts have what has been described as an open marriage. And Schmidt has been rumored to have a bit of a playboy lifestyle with younger girlfriends in recent years. And now, this is one of them, Michelle Ritter. She's now 31 years old. She is a tech entrepreneur. She does have quite the resume. She graduated from Johns Hopkins for her undergrad. Then she went on to graduate from Columbia Law. She reportedly met the former Google CEO in 2021 while she was in school. The two of them then sparked up a romantic relationship, though there is roughly 40 years between them. Schmidt reportedly also invested $100 million in his young girlfriend's AI startup in 2023. That's according to an article by Forbes. Ritter was the company's CEO. Now, Ritter's romance with Schmidt ended sometime in 2024, and the breakup, well, from what we are seeing, this did not go well. And there's still a lot of legal fallout, and Ritter has made some shocking allegations against the former Google CEO as their legal drama has played out. Now, this is a request that has just come to light of a temporary restraining order that Ritter filed in December of 2024. Specifically, she signed it on December 11th of last year against Eric Schmidt. In the request, she claims on December 10th, 2024, Schmidt abused her, and she says, quote, "The extent of emotional harm to me is enormous when I have been building businesses and finally have a clear path to working on my own. Thankfully, and yet once again, my path has been blocked by his cybercrime and theft as well as harassment. His use of capital to extort and harass me has been daunting, and I need help to make this stop. Please." Now, she goes on to say that Schmidt allegedly stole her corporate website, which is the website for the company that Schmidt invested in, and he used his, quote, affiliates to allegedly steal intellectual property, litigation documents, personal materials, and contacts related to a broader network of friends, colleagues, and family. She then goes on to accuse Schmidt of stalking her, not just her though, but also allegedly stalking her parents. And her parents have been, quote, terrified, she says in court documents. Now, the New York Post also says Ritter accused Schmidt of toxic masculinity. She goes on to say that Schmidt demanded that she agree to a gag order on any sexual assault or harassment allegations and sign a knowingly false declaration that any such allegations never happened. That is per the New York Post. Ritter goes on to say that Schmidt allegedly had private investigators watch her at what she says was her house. Now, those investigators, she says, followed her elderly parents to dinner, and then they called police. And she says when officers confronted that private investigator, the man allegedly said that he worked for a, quote, billionaire's security detail. Hey, before we get back to this episode of On the Case, which is one of the most watched shows on YouTube, I want to stop and talk about our partners at Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm. They have more than 1,000 attorneys and they win a lot. They've recovered over $25 billion from more than 500,000 clients. In the past few months, a client in Florida received $12 million after the insurance company offered just $350,000. In Pennsylvania, a client was awarded $26 million. That is 40 times the insurer's $650,000 offer. Another client in Pennsylvania received $29 million after being offered only $500,000. Even if you don't think your case is worth millions of dollars, why not fight for what you deserve? Morgan & Morgan makes it so easy to start a claim. You can do it with just 8 clicks on your phone. So if you've been injured and you need to start a claim, go to www.forthepeople.com/OTC. You can also scan this QR code on your screen or click the link below. In the documents from 2024, she says her residence is on Brookhaven Drive in Los Angeles. And when we looked up the address, it is for a 13-bedroom, 17-bathroom, 15,000 square foot mansion valued at nearly $53 million, according to Zillow. A trust for the Hilton family reportedly sold that home in 2021, and the buyer was former Google CEO Eric Schmidt. In the request from last year, Ritter asks that she be in sole possession of the home. The New York Post is now reporting, though, as of last month, Ritter's address is a modest Beverly Hills apartment. Now, in the restraining order request, Ritter asks that there's protection for herself and her 2 parents, and she also put in a request for protection for her German Shepherd, Henry. Now, these are certainly strong allegations against a very powerful person, accusing them of abuse, accusing them of stalking. Less than 2 weeks after that request for a temporary restraining order was put in December of last year, Ritter rescinded the request for a permanent restraining order against Schmidt. The two allegedly reached an agreement, according to the New York Post, for her to drop that request and to do it forever. But now Ritter is reportedly accusing Schmidt of not following through on whatever agreement they had, so all of this is now coming to light. Schmidt is denying that he didn't follow through with that deal. He claims that Ritter's accusations in a heavily redacted court document are an abuse of the justice system. This case is continuing on. It is slated to have a hearing in court in Los Angeles in December. Joining us now to help us make sense of what's going on in this back and forth involving Eric Schmidt is Nima Rahmani, former federal prosecutor and the president of West Coast Trial Lawyers. Always great to have you with us on Law and Crime. So what stands out? I mean, these are pretty serious allegations when it comes to the stalking and the abuse that the apparent former mistress of Eric Schmidt is accusing her of. What stands out to you when you read this story?
Chris, thanks for having me. So much going on in this case, right? I mean, obviously, the most serious would be potentially criminal. You're talking about sexual assault, but there's romantic allegations as well, right? You're talking about the stalking, and of course, these two are business partners, so there's that as well. I don't know if there's an employer-employee relationship, so there's potential employment claims, maybe some domestic violence family law claims. They're talking about a fight over the dog, the house, and of course, if there really was any type of criminal activity like stalking or even rape, that would be very serious for Schmidt.
Yeah, and there's certainly the business part of it. And when you're talking about someone who is, I think he's the 44th wealthiest person on planet Earth, they're fighting over who has possession of this mansion. I could see a lot of, I would say, normal people almost would just like have a hard time empathizing with this story. But then you hear that this is a person, her parents are elderly, they're allegedly being stalked, she claims, by kind of this network that she says Eric Schmidt has. Police were called at one point, and he has a private investigator, a member of his security team, according to what she was saying last year, outside of the house. Why would police not do more in that situation? Even if she rescinds this order a week later, it just seems kind of suspicious that you go from, I am terrified that all of this is happening, to actually just kidding, we were able to reach a verdict, or an agreement, and now we're just going to move forward with that.
Chris, I live and work in Los Angeles, and I can tell you that LAPD is probably not going to get involved and arrest people if they feel that it's a business dispute or it is a disagreement that isn't resulting in violence. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just telling you the reality of living in a huge city like Los Angeles where there's so much more serious crime happening. Again, she may absolutely be a victim of domestic violence and stalking, but just telling you how things work here in Los Angeles, unless things escalate, probably we're not going to start seeing arrests yet.
On the civil side, if she says her mom in this order that she put in, and I know they're having this legal back and forth going forward, how could the stalking and abuse allegations that she made back then factor into any sort of legal issue that they have moving forward?
So there's a couple types of restraining orders. You can get a civil harassment restraining order, you can get a domestic violence restraining order, but really the process is the same, and you can protect yourself, you could protect your family members as well. So if the allegations are true, and as Ritter says, Schmidt is stalking her, she has no privacy, she can't have a personal email or phone. If that is substantiated and a judge agrees, then that judge can issue a restraining order ordering Schmidt to have no contact with Ritter whatsoever or any of her family members for a period of 3 to 5 years.
And looking at, I was just pulling up one part because she had claimed in a lawsuit, this is according to the New York Post that has this document, that Schmidt tried to force her to sign a gag order on any sexual assault or harassment allegations. If someone is sexually assaulted, can a gag order or any sort of legal document stop them from going public with what they say happened?
Chris, you're absolutely right. The answer to that is no. And Ritter should know better. I believe she's a lawyer or has some legal training. So under California law, and really actually under federal law as well, NDAs, gag orders, they are not enforceable when it comes to sexual assault, sexual harassment, or sexual abuse, period. In fact, I know there's an arbitration provision here, but if there are those types of allegations, they actually get the case out of a private arbitration as well, and you can get into court where obviously that would be public.
When it comes to NDAs, I mean, just how, generally speaking, how often do you see people use that, especially people who might be more powerful than somebody else, as a threat that legally just doesn't really have a lot of merit?
Chris, I see it all the time, and not only am I a former federal prosecutor, I only represent victims in cases like this. So we see sexual assault, sexual abuse, sexual harassment victims all the time that are afraid because some rich and powerful individual, usually a man, has had them sign an NDA, and they're worried about getting sued. And I tell them, this document is not enforceable with respect to the allegations that you're making, and you can always file as a Jane Doe in states like California that do allow it. So it's certainly a technique or a strategy, but it's usually not an enforceable one.
I know, I mean, just to generally speak, I think Eric Schmidt's net worth is around $44 billion. He's, again, one of the most powerful people in terms of wealth on the planet. Ritter, who was his romantic partner reportedly for a period of time, and now it appears, according to the Post that had this, that she's living in a more modest apartment, that she's financially certainly not as powerful as Eric Schmidt. And legally speaking, what protections could she have to try to level the playing field going up against someone who could, push any sort of legal issue for years against her with a very massive legal team if he wanted to?
Well, there's certainly a disparity in wealth, but she's hired a pretty prominent lawyer here in Los Angeles, Skip Miller, and Schmidt has hired Patty Glazier, another well-known lawyer. So she's doing okay in terms of having legal representation and counsel. Obviously, she's probably not a billionaire, but Schmidt invested some significant money in her company. I don't know, obviously, how much she was making financially, but there are probably lawyers that are willing to go after someone like Schmidt, even on a contingency basis, which means they won't even charge hourly. If we were representing a victim, for instance, at my firm, we would just charge a percentage of the recovery. So I don't think she's necessarily going to be locked out of hiring a good quality lawyer, even if she doesn't have the ability to pay an upfront retainer or pay on an hourly basis.
Going back to the request that she had put in for that temporary restraining order, there was one part of the line that said, is asking about how did this person abuse you? And when you hear abuse, I mean, that is a very powerful word. And I'm not questioning whether she was in a very stressful business situation, but the first thing that she writes down is that she was locked out of her accounts, that Eric Schmidt used, the powers that he has as someone who was the head of Google for more than 15 years to cyber stalk her. But at the same time, it's not the same as someone would think, I think, like domestic abuse, of physical violence, yelling, screaming at someone. We've seen that as verbal abuse. How does what she's accusing him of actually be looked at as an example of abuse?
It's an important factor. And like you said, obviously, the worst would be some sort of physical violence. That's an easy way to get a restraining order. But expect Schmidt's lawyers to say, hey, this is just a dispute between two business partners. She's trying to leverage the romantic relationship to gain an advantage in the business dispute, right? I'm not saying that that's true or not, but expect that defense, and you nailed it right there, Chris. Of course, she'll say that this wasn't just a business relationship, this was a romantic relationship, and here's someone that was abusive, here's someone who was stalking, here's someone who was controlling, here's someone who's manipulative, and even though there hasn't been any violence yet, there's been threats of control and violence, right? That's the nexus that you want to prove if you're Ritter's team.
And he reportedly invested $100 million in this AI startup that she was the CEO of, but they were also dating. And then there's kind of the salacious part of it is apparently he had an open marriage with his wife, who he's still legally married to. How could, when you look at some of these business dispute cases, how does the fact that they were romantically involved factor into what happens to the money when it comes to, it seems like this company did not do particularly well after he invested money and then put someone who, she's very impressive in terms of where she went to college, but a $100 million investment to someone who I think was 29 years old at the time, which is pretty young to be handling a company of that size.
No question. Obviously, people are talking about this significant age difference. And let's just be very candid and honest. There's a significant difference in their appearance as well. I mean, he's much, much older than her. They apparently, went to Burning Man, and there's been speculations and rumors that there was drug use. There's certainly some allegations by some members of her company. Again, I'm not saying any of that is substantiated, right? But I think that's all part of the story here, right? Now, when it comes to the employment context, she is the CEO, but he's the chairman of the board, so he can technically potentially remove her, right? A board of directors can remove a CEO, so that's where that sexual harassment comes in, right? She's going to argue probably in the employment case, because we have multiple cases going on here, right? You got your restraining order case, you got your civil case, but you likely have an employment case as well, and she's going to say, listen, I was sexually harassed. I had to perform sexual favors, or I was hired because of my looks. It was a sexually charged environment, right? Now, of course, sexual harassment has to be unwelcome. That's one of the important factors here under California law. We also have employment cases. So the defense on Schmidt's side will be that, well, this was consensual. This certainly was not unwelcome. You were a willing participant, right? Now, of course, just because you say yes today doesn't mean you can't withdraw that consent. So it's going to be very important, the history of their romantic relationship, the history of their business relationship, that at some point she say, you know what, I don't want to have anything to do with you romantically. We can remain business partners. And how did he respond to that? So when I said there's a lot going on here, Chris, there's just so much going on here, and all of that is going to be relevant. They're multi-year romantic and business history.
Right, because and speaking on the sexual harassment part of it, she reportedly used in one of the, and this is also, I'm quoting the Post, toxic masculinity was a term that she used, which has definitely become, I would say since the Me Too movement, a much more prominent term, just publicly and conversationally, but legally, when someone uses that in a lawsuit, what type of weight can that carry when you're accusing someone of that?
Well, being toxic or being masculine isn't necessarily unlawful, but discrimination based on someone's gender is. So her lawyers are going to need to tie that in to gender-based discrimination, sexual harassment. Now, some of this is for the courtroom. Some of this is also for the court of public opinion, right? These are two very high-profile individuals, and when you litigate these types of cases here in Los Angeles, these filings, they're going to get a lot of press. We're talking about it on Law&Crime, obviously. So some of these buzzwords don't necessarily move the needle legally, but certainly can do some damage from a PR perspective.
In the temporary restraining order requests that she put in, that's where she makes these abuse allegations. She details the stalking of not just her, but she says her parents, and then even tries to get protection for Henry, which is a German Shepherd dog that she had. She also says that she wants possession of this $52 million mansion that she was living in, but then she withdraws all of that. When you withdraw that restraining order request, do all the details in that go away from future proceedings? Because there is in that a lot of language saying that this has been dismissed, it's over with, and it's done.
So when it comes to restraining orders, there's three types. And to answer your question, when you withdraw, that doesn't prejudice you necessarily from going back to the court and requesting a new restraining order. So there's really three types under California law. The first is what we call an emergency protective order. That means someone's at the police station, police officers call, they get a judge on the phone, and they get an emergency restraining order, usually for a period of a week, right? That allows the party to go to court to get a temporary restraining order. And usually that temporary restraining order lasts for a period of weeks. And the temporary restraining orders are usually ex parte, although you got to provide notice to the other side. But the judge will say, you know what, I want to keep things status quo for 21 days or so until we have a permanent restraining order hearing. A permanent restraining order hearing in California, that's a full-blown mini trial. Now, there's no jury, but a judge is going to hear testimony from witnesses, the parties involved, right? Review text messages, emails, can last a day, can last two, and then make a decision on a permanent restraining order that will last years. And the permanent restraining order is important. If you violate it, depending on what type, you have to be arrested. If it's a domestic violence restraining order and a civil harassment, you certainly can be arrested as well. So it does have a lot of teeth, and really depends on how far the aggrieved person, the person who's being abused, wants to push it.
And then just because this case involves such a wealthy person, a lot of resources, there's, between, I think in this as well, there's homes that's talked about not just in LA, but in Aspen. I mean, this is happening at a level of a tax bracket that no one will ever sniff in their lifetime other than a very small group of people. Typically, though, these types of cases, when you look at the dynamics, if there aren't those kind of resources, how do these typically play out?
Typically, they go away, right? You write a check and the problem goes away. Now, sometimes people that have a lot of money, they don't write that check and the problem doesn't go away. If Diddy had given Cassie Ventura another $10 million when she was asking for 20 and he insisted on only giving her 10, she wouldn't have filed that civil lawsuit and the whole criminal trial probably wouldn't have happened. So sometimes people who are wealthy don't make good decisions, or they receive bad advice. Now, I'm not saying that, Schmidt is responsible or liable, but typically here in Hollywood, I can tell you 8 times out of 10, when there's an allegation of abuse and you're worth billions of dollars, you're going to write a check and that's going to go away. Now, apparently there was some sort of settlement in December. I don't know the terms of that settlement. Obviously, those were confidential, but Ritter is saying that Schmidt hasn't been paying. So I don't know what happened here, how things went sideways. But you're right, Chris. Typically, this dirty laundry, when it comes to rich and famous people, doesn't spill over into the courtroom.
No, it certainly is this time, though. Nima Rahmani, it's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Fascinating case here out of California. We'll see how it plays out. Thanks for being with us.
Of course, Chris. Thanks for having me.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.